Well, I'm pretty certain that day that I saw a spaceship sitting here.
November 9th, 1979. This was no fleeting light in the sky or a distant object on the horizon. It was a physical event that left its mark not only on the ground, but on the actual witness. It would draw police involvement, forensic investigation, and worldwide attention, yet it's never conclusively been explained. The man at the centre of this encounter was Robert Taylor, a 61-year-old forester and war veteran. Taylor was a no-nonsense Scotsman whose life revolved around work, family, and the quiet rhythm of rural life. By all accounts, he was a man of integrity, unshakably grounded and not prone to flights of fancy. What he experienced that day remains one of the most credible and baffling UFO cases ever recorded. On that fateful morning, Robert Taylor began his day as usual. He left his home in the quiet neighbourhood of Deans in Livingston and drove his work vehicle, a Bedford truck, to Dechmont Woods. As a forester for the Livingston Development Corporation, it was his responsibility to inspect the fences and clearings in the area. Accompanied by his loyal dog Lara, Taylor parked the truck on the pathway and began his routine walk into the forest. At approximately 10:30 a.m, Taylor emerged into a clearing deep within the woods. And what he saw there would change his life forever. Standing before him was a large, domed object unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was approximately 20 feet in diameter and about 12 feet high. The object appeared to be metallic. Around its midsection was a band studded with small projections resembling antennae or rotors. Above this band, porthole-like apertures encircled the dome and the entire craft hovered silently. Taylor's first thought was not fear, but curiosity. As he approached the craft, he was hit by an overwhelming, acrid smell, reminiscent of burning brake pads. The air grew thick and oppressive, and his dog Lara began to bark frantically from the edge of the clearing. And then, without warning, two smaller objects appeared from beneath the craft. They resembled spherical mines, about 3 feet in diameter, with spiked appendages protruding from their surfaces, and these spheres moved towards Taylor with a rolling, bouncing motion, with their spikes digging into the soft ground. Before Taylor could react, the spheres reached him. He felt a sharp, mechanical grip around his thighs, as though pincers were clamping down on him. The pressure was immense, and he was suddenly overwhelmed by a burning sensation beneath his chin. In that moment, his legs gave way, and he fell forward onto the cold, damp ground. Taylor's next memory was silence. The craft, the spheres, and the smell had all gone. He awoke face down in the clearing, weak and disoriented. His dog was barking in the distance, and his trousers were torn at the thighs. Struggling to his feet, he staggered back to his truck. As he attempted to start the vehicle, he found his motor skills failing him. His hands refused to respond, and his mind was clouded. When he finally managed to move the truck, it became bogged down in the soft earth. Desperate and dazed, Taylor abandoned the vehicle. When Taylor arrived home, his wife, Mary, was immediately alarmed, as you would be. His face was pale, his clothing was torn and covered in mud, and he seemed to be in shock. He muttered something about being attacked by a spaceship. Mary called Taylor's employer, Malcolm Drummond, who quickly came to the house. Drummond, sceptical but concerned, accompanied Taylor back to the clearing, and what they found was startling. Set in the clearing were two distinct sets of marks. The first was a series of deep, parallel grooves in the grass, as though made by heavy tracked vehicles, and these tracks, approximately 10 feet long and 7 feet apart, had no lead-in or exit trails, suggesting the object had simply appeared and then disappeared. Surrounding the tracks were dozens of small circular indentations, each about 3 inches deep and angled into the ground. These peculiar marks seemed consistent with the spikes on the spherical objects that Taylor had described. Drummond contacted the police, who treated the incident as an assault by unknown persons. 7 officers arrived at the scene, including a forensic team. Soil samples and photographs were taken, and Taylor's torn trousers were sent for analysis. Forensic scientists determined that the tears were consistent with a strong, upward, mechanical pull while the trousers were worn.
The trousers were sent to the police laboratories to be put under the scrutiny of forensic expert Lester Knibb.
There was 2 sets of damage, predominantly close enough to be considered symmetrical. It's obviously been caused by a lifting action. It's not the sort of action that's caused by a fall. The tear would normally be down the trousers. Certainly the story could fit the bill, that some object or objects had moved across a clearing towards him, attempted to lift him up and carry him off.
These marks are consistent with the material having been pulled up while the trousers were being worn.
The soil sample revealed no traces of oil or fuel or any other substance typically associated with heavy machinery, which ruled out the possibility of construction equipment or vehicles causing the grooves in the indentation.
There is no doubt in my mind that these marks were made by a perfectly solid, heavier-than-air object. They had been made by some machine which had come vertically downwards. I think there's no doubt about that.
The area was fenced off and police began an intensive search. They found nothing.
The ground beneath the grooves was compacted, suggesting that some significant weight had been applied. Officers canvassed the surrounding Dechmont Woods, speaking with locals in Livingston and the nearby neighbourhood of Deans and Knightsridge, but no one reported seeing anything or hearing anything unusual that morning. The investigators considered alternative explanations, such as pranksters or hoaxers, but they didn't find any evidence to support that theory either. There were no additional footprints or discarded materials in the clearing, and the remoteness of the location made it an unlikely site for a staged event. And what about those spheres? Their behaviour? Methodical and deliberate, and seemingly autonomous? It raises questions about their purpose, doesn't it? Were they probes designed to gather data? Their movement and the way they sort of clamped onto Taylor suggests a very clear intent, as though performing an analysis or even attempting to incapacitate him somehow. Could they have been examining him biologically or collecting samples, or even trying to abduct him? They might have been guardians or some sort of a defence mechanism programmed to protect the craft from any threats. There's more exotic possibilities also. These spheres might have been intelligent entities themselves, biomechanical hybrids with their own consciousness. If so, what do they perceive in Robert Taylor that warranted such a response? Or were they reacting to the dog? Dogs often perceive sounds and movements or electromagnetic fields that humans can't detect. Maybe Lara could have detected the sphere's approach or their presence before they became visible or audible to Taylor. If the spheres were scanning or emitting signals, Lara's heightened senses might have picked up on these and she might have reacted defensively. She was backing. It could have influenced the sphere's behaviour, potentially alarming them.
It was a huge thing with a big round dome, a very dark grey colour, and it had a big flange going all the way around. I could see arms sticking out of this flange with what I took to be blades on the top. As I stood here, there was 2 balls came out, 2 balls, I would think they'd be about 3 feet in diameter, with about 6 spikes, and they were rolling on these spikes, and they came right up beside me, and I remember feeling a tug at that time, and a very powerful smell, a choking sort of smell, and that was it.
He looked quite shocked, and he was drained, he was right white, and his face was dirty, and he had a red scar here, and his clothes were all dirty, and his trousers, and then he told me his trousers had been torn.
On examining the area, I found 2 trike marks in approximately 40 holes in the ground. This is a photograph of the hole here.
You know, when you start looking at cases like Robert Taylor's encounters, some patterns just start to jump out, don't they? Things that make you wonder, is there more to these events than just random chance? Could something about the very ground beneath Taylor's feet have played a role in what happened? Geologists have long noted that areas with high magnetic activity, whether from fault lines or volcanic regions or specific minerals even, can create electromagnetic anomalies. And think about it, electromagnetic interference comes up all the time in UFO encounters. Engines stall and watches stop working, don't they? Lights flicker. It's almost as if these phenomena either create or are drawn to these kinds of hotspots. Maybe Dechmont Woods, with its magnetic quirks, acted like a kind of beacon for whatever it was that Taylor encountered. It's in an area with some interesting geological features. Scotland's Midland Valley is geologically complex. It's shaped by ancient volcanic activity, and it's full of mineral-rich soil. I wonder what the acrid smell was, like the smell of brake pads. This smell could indicate a mechanical process was involved. Perhaps the craft, or whatever it was, used some sort of propulsion or stabilisation system that created this smell. What about chemicals? Could it be a byproduct of whatever it was that powered the craft? A lot of reports of UFOs include descriptions of weird smells, ozone-type smells, or a sulphur smell, ammonia even. Maybe the smell of the brake pads was tied to, I don't know, particles in the air or some sort of fuel that we don't know about. But here's another thought. What if the smell wasn't mechanical or fuel, but what if the craft or the spheres emitted it intentionally? So think about skunks. They use their smell as defence, don't they? So could this smell have been a deterrent, designed to disorient or drive Taylor away? Or was it an unintentional side effect of a biological signature? Is it that these objects were alive in some way, and that's just what they smell like? I mean, we don't know, do we? It's fascinating. Robert Taylor's encounter is pretty unique. It's not completely without parallel, however. Across the globe, similar incidents involving spiked or spherical objects have been reported. In 1973, for example, during the Pascagoula abduction in Mississippi, 2 men reported encountering humanoid beings accompanied by floating spherical objects. These spheres emitted a faint hum and seemed to operate with a sort of mechanical intelligence. Another case in Voronezh, Russia, 1989. Witnesses, including children, reported seeing a UFO accompanied by small spherical objects that appeared to scout the area. These orbs exhibited intelligence and seemed to interact with the environment before retreating into the main craft. One account also comes from someone called Gordon McAracha, a retired janitor from West Lothian who recently broke his silence about an experience that took place in 1974, only a couple of miles from the site of Taylor's encounter, right here at Ormiston Farm. Gordon described seeing a brown metallic conical structure, roughly the size of a caravan, hovering about 100 feet above him. The object travelled silently, reflecting moonlight off its surface as it moved in the direction of Bathgate and Dechmont. And after observing the craft, Gordon made his way to a phone box on Langton Road and contacted the air traffic control at Edinburgh Airport. The response he received was an unsettling one. No aircraft had entered that area, or had left the area in the past hour, and nothing unusual appeared on their radar. For years, Gordon kept this encounter to himself, but he later found validation in an illustration on a similar craft in Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. I happen to have that book, so here's the picture. And in fact, Robert Taylor's account is also mentioned in that same book. Even more disconcerting was the rough treatment experienced by a forester working for the Livingston Development Corporation in Scotland on Friday the 9th of November 1979. At 10 o'clock that morning, Bob Taylor was making a routine check of woodland outside the town when he turned a corner in the forest and was transfixed by the sight of a large metallic cone sitting in the clearing. Bob Taylor says, "I just came round this corner and I was amazed to see this vehicle sitting there. I was just rooted to the spot. It was like a huge spinning top, 20 feet or so wide and the same in height, with a huge flange right around about it. There was a rod sticking out of this flange with what I took to be blades on top and portholes behind those blades going right around the dome. Suddenly 2 balls with long spiked supports raced towards him from the UFO. He blacked out, and when he came round, he couldn't tell how much later, his trousers were ripped and he had a bad headache. He felt drained of energy, but was eventually able to struggle home after abandoning his van at the roadside. His trousers had been ripped in a strange fashion, with a long upward tear in the strong fabric. His thighs were scratched, and there was an unpleasant taste in his mouth, similar to the smell he remembered just before blacking out. Once again the police were called, and they photographed a 15-foot diameter ring of spiked holes. The holes themselves were 4 inches deep and 3.5 inches in diameter, but neither the police nor Bob Taylor, who had worked at Livingston for 16 years, could solve the mystery. And you'll notice there's a detail that wasn't mentioned anywhere else, and that is that Bob's leg was also scratched where his trousers had been torn. So, if there's that little extra detail there, maybe there's a bit more in the newspapers from the time, so let's just have a quick look at those. This is from the Scotsman of Saturday the 10th of November 1979. A forestry worker was last night recovering from a close encounter of the strangest kind. Police have fenced off the site of an alleged assault by strange creatures. They confirmed that there were marks on the ground, including a large number of indentations which could be consistent with an object standing on stilts. There were also some deep tread-like marks. The police spokesman said there could be 100 feasible explanations for these marks. Yesterday morning, Mr. Bob Taylor, a foreman forester, staggered into his home at Brumino Drive in Livingston Station, shocked and dishevelled. His wife, Mary, called Mr. Malcolm Drummond, head of the Livingston Development Corporation Forestry Department. Mr. Taylor told him that he had been working alone in the forest at Dechmont Hill, Livingston, at about 10 a.m. on Friday. He rounded the corner, and in the path he was confronted by a silver spinning top-shaped craft, standing in a clearing. From the craft came 2 creatures, who grabbed him by the hips and tried to drag him into their machine, Mr. Taylor claimed. All he can remember after that is very strong smell and the sound of a dog barking, which he thinks may have frightened off his assailants. He must have passed out, either from the smell or the shock, and when he came to, the clearing was empty, and there was a pattern of deep, regular marks in the ground. He went to his van, but it was so shaken that he was unable to drive. Mr. Taylor then staggered the 1.5 miles to his house, and his wife called Mr. Drummond, who later called the police. Mr. Taylor was taken to Bangor General Hospital, where he was detained. His trousers were torn and both sides of his thighs were scratched and bruised, said Mr. Drummond. CID officers were last night waiting for Mr. Taylor to recover sufficiently to be questioned. Mr. Drummond visited the part of the woods about 400 yards from the M8, where Mr. Taylor said he had his close encounter. There are distinct triangular marks on the ground, but no scorch marks. As for the craft, Bob insists it was not a type of machine he recognised. Mr. Taylor is a sensible, straightforward man, Mr. Drummond added. Police checking helicopter flights from Edinburgh and Glasgow yesterday found none had been flying near the Livingston area at all. A hospital spokesman said last night that Mr. Taylor had discharged himself from hospital and had gone home. He could not be contacted at his home last night. And then this from the day after, from the Sunday Express. An area of Scottish grassland was sealed off on the advice of police yesterday after a forestry worker claimed he was attacked there by creatures from space. Experts in the field of unidentified flying objects rushed to the site at Livingston in West Lothian to examine imprints on the ground. Last night a police spokesman said, "It's all very strange. There are indentations on the ground as if made by the legs of some machine, but there are no marks leading to the spot, which is in quite a secluded area. Bob Taylor, a 50-year-old forestry foreman, says he was assaulted by two creatures who tried to pull him into their spacecraft. It happened early on Friday morning when Mr. Taylor was working alone on Dechmont Hill near the M8 Glasgow-Edinburgh motorway. His boss, Mr. Malcolm Drummond, said Bob Taylor is not a man to make something up. If he says he was attacked by some creatures, then there must have been something there, and indentations in the ground bear this out. Mr. Taylor and his wife Mary were last night visiting relatives in England. Bob was shocked and upset by the incident, said Mr. Drummond, who is head of the Livingston Development Corporation Forestry Department, but he had arranged some time ago to make this trip, and he thought he would go ahead with it, despite what happened, as it would allow him to get away from all the publicity. Neighbours of Mr. Taylor, of Brumino Drive in Livingston Station, backed up Mr. Drummond's description of Mr. Taylor as a sensible, straightforward man. Mr. Taylor said that as he reached a clearing on the hill, he was faced with a silvery-coloured spacecraft, and suddenly two creatures, shaped like wheels with arms, peeled off from the side of the craft and slowly approached him. They grabbed him by the sides of his trousers and tore them, leaving scratch marks on his thighs. At this point, Mr. Taylor fainted, but he said he had the sensation of being dragged towards the craft. Later investigations revealed two small trail marks that could have been made by the feet of someone being dragged. Mr. Taylor also remembers a strong chemical smell, and his red setter, normally a placid creature, barking furiously. When he came round, he was dazed and shocked, and the creatures and their craft had gone. All that remained were a dozen or so deep, triangular marks in the ground. There were also two parallel caterpillar tracks on the same spot, but there were no scorch marks, just flattened grass. After the incident, Mr. Taylor, a father of 7 grown-up children, crawled several yards back to his van, but after reversing it he felt unable to drive, and the vehicle was stuck in the mud. Later, police found the van with the engine still running and the radio microphone lying on the floor. Mr. Taylor, still dazed, walked the 1.5 miles to his home before contacting Mr. Drummond. Although there were no witnesses to the events on Dechmont Hill, a 72-year-old Glasgow woman yesterday came forward with claims of a sighting which could add substance to Mr. Taylor's story. Mrs. Mary Hunter, of Drumlendrick Avenue in Easter House, who lives opposite a large field, said she noticed a pale white ball-shaped object in the sky on Friday afternoon. "I called my neighbour and we watched it for some time," she said. "I'm sure I saw it split up in half and then come back together again. Then it suddenly just vanished. There was no flickering or anything. It was something I hadn't seen before. I don't drink, so I was not seeing things." Mr. Stuart Campbell, a member of the British UFO Research Association, said, "I found parallel lines on the site described by Mr. Taylor. Also, there were marks of a circular design and a series of holes in a pattern around the tracks. What I saw could have been caused by a spacecraft, but there could of course be another explanation, such as a bolt of ball lightning." And then this one from the West Lothian Courier, November 16th, 1979. Forest worker Bob Taylor this week told of his frightening encounter with a spacecraft. He claimed that he came upon the craft in a clearing in Dechmont Law near Deer Hill in Livingston, and two robot-like creatures came towards him and tried to force him into the craft. Bob, 61, held up a rough drawing he'd made of the craft, a grey machine between 20 and 30 feet wide with a finish like emery paper. The two robots were shaped like landmines, but with longer spikes which they used for walking, making suction-like noise as they went. The incident happened on Friday morning. Bob said he then passed out, and when he came to, the ship had gone, and he could only hear his dog barking. He ran to his home at Brumino Drive in Deans and Livingston with his trousers torn. His wife Mary called a doctor, and his boss, Mr. Malcolm Drummond, manager of Livingston Development Corporation's Forestry Division at Rosebank, for whom Bob has worked since 1963, and he said, "At first, I didn't take Bob's claim too seriously, but he leapt to his feet and insisted that he take me to the spot. I must admit, I'd been very sceptical, but I was astonished to find very pronounced indentations at the place. They looked as if a bulldozer had been placed and then lifted from the spot without any tracks leading to or from the marks. Mr. Drummond added that there were triangular hoof marks near the other point where the other marks lay. Bob Taylor told pressmen that 2 robots had given off an acrid-smelling gas which he believes knocked him out, he said. "I don't think they were out to do any harm, but I was very frightened. I'm a countryman and I've never seen anything like this before." So, you've got some details there that are consistent, the part about the dog barking, the part about the tearing of the trousers, and then you get these other little differences peppered in and among, don't you? You know, initially these spheres were robotic, or seemed like they were part of the craft, and then the next thing we're saying it was creatures that grabbed Bob, and then we're saying the creatures looked like landmines, and that curious suction sound is mentioned. I know you can't put too much faith in what the papers say, but it's interesting just to highlight all these little differences. What do you think about this one? You let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button please, it's a thumbs up button in the corner there, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and share this video with your friends. Bye for now.